Even after we had 5 feet of mud removed from our shallow irrigation well, it still runs dry in the middle of summer. It's definitely better than it was, but to expand our garden, we need more water. Last year we bought 2 rainwater tanks, a 1200 gallon and a 500 gallon. In this series, I'll go through all the steps I took to install and connect this first tank to the gutters of these 2 workshops. In the following series, I'll look at the smaller 500 gallon tank that we installed off-grid in the garden and powered the pump with solar. So that's coming up a bit later. So in this first episode, I'll go through building a solid foundation to support the weight of all that water. In part 2, I'll connect the tank to the roof gutters, and in part 3, I'll detail how I built the fence that surrounds part of the tank and cover connecting the tank to a pump to feed our garden system. Our property is on Vancouver Island and we get a lot of rain in the winter, but the summers seem to be getting drier and drier. We need enough extra water on hand to make it through July and August, mainly. So we estimated that this 1200 gallon and the other 500 gallon tank would be just big enough to cover that dry spell. Drawing from these tanks for part of that time should give the shallow irrigation well some time to recover. I've never installed a rainwater tank beyond a 55 gallon poly drum before, so I was learning as I was going along. There's a lot of great info online for installing tanks. I really like the video Frank Howarth did a few years back on the tank he put in beside his shop. I'll put a link to that here and in the description below. I can now totally relate to his experience and how long it took him thinking through the process before drilling his first hole in the tank. Our property has a gradual slope and there's no truly flat spot for this tank. I wanted to install it on the downslope side of these 2 workshops and draw water from their combined roofs. And given the height of the tank and the height of the gutters, we found the best spot just off the corner here. We needed to build a solid flat base for the tank that also drained well. Water coming off the top of the tank runs down the sides and may erode the base material. So that was a consideration in the design of the tank foundation. I decided to pour a low concrete curb that would hold the gravel and also support the fence later. I have several other projects on the go this summer that require a low concrete wall, so I can reuse the forms. For me, it made sense to invest the extra time and expense to pour concrete for this. I set the tank where I thought it should go and marked lines on the lawn. This tank is not heavy, but just large and awkward. Works best to roll and lift a bit at a time. With a spade, I cut the sod into a grid of square sections, then removed the sod and topsoil to create this flat, level spot. It took a few hours and a lot of wheelbarrow trips for Marilyn, but it was a really good workout. A 5-inch wide by 8-inch high curb will be poured here, then filled with gravel, and the tank will sit on that. Beside the tank, there's a perforated pipe about a foot underground that's surrounded by drain rock. We dug that in a few years ago to help with drainage behind the shed and workshop. As I'm essentially creating a bathtub with a concrete curb, I'll need a path for the water to flow away. I'll bury a short length of pipe to direct the water from under the tank to the drain rock surrounding that existing pipe. I dug a trough and lined it with drain cloth, added some gravel, then the pipe, more rock, and then topped it with fabric. I made the forms from 1x8s. They will be held in place with 1x2 stakes. Temporary 5-inch blocks help with spacing the inner and outer forms. More stakes are driven in, and then the blocks removed. I attach 2x4s to the boards to screw the stakes to. I'm not a forming contractor, and I'm sure there's a simpler way to do this, but this is what works for me. I roughly position the outer forms and clamp the corners together. Then run in some screws. This worked well to create this basic box. It's funny what you discover when you film yourself working on a project. I seem to have a furniture or woodworker's approach to what is really rough carpentry. I'm not a carpenter or a builder, I simply have a passion for building things. And I don't have an issue at all with constructive criticism or tips from builders out there. We can all benefit here, so I welcome your feedback. Then I squared and leveled it as I was driving in stakes to hold it in its final position. With the outside form boards in place, I can make the inner walls that will create the curb. I wasn't sure how well the forms would come apart on the inside, as I was worried that they would bind against each other. So I made the inner form walls in 2 pieces. I cut the end off the inner form wall at a 45-degree angle on one end. Then I reattached it with a mending board. I figure this will make stripping the forms easier, as this piece can pivot away from the corner. I'm not sure if I really needed to build them this way, but it only took a few minutes to do this. This idea came about as I was working on a square concrete planter form. It seems that it can be challenging to disassemble the inside of a closed space. More on that project in a future video. I clamp and screw the inner forms together and attach the 5-inch spacer blocks. That worked great. It helped suspend the inner form at almost level as I pounded in the stakes. I ended up using 2 blocks at each corner. Once these were removed, I coated the inside of the form with vegetable oil. I bent 4 10-foot lengths of rebar, wired them together, and suspended them from wires so they would stay in the center of the curb during the pour. Now it's a matter of loading the concrete mixer and filling the forms. My little mixer can handle only 2 bags at a time. To save my back, I have the bags stacked at the end of my pickup box. I add some water, set the bag over the drum, and cut it open to dump it in. Then start the drum spinning before tilting it. When this is mixed, I'll do the same with the second bag. The curb is narrow, so I opted to fill the forms by hand with a shovel instead of just pouring the concrete right out of the wheelbarrow. Given the slope and access, I decided I'd spill a fair amount of the wet concrete, so shoveling would take longer but waste less. And this seemed to work well. Marilyn came to give me a hand. We got into a flow and the pour went much faster than I expected. I loaded the mixer and Marilyn filled the forms. Before the concrete hardened, I added some anchor bolts for the post brackets and covered the fresh concrete with plastic. After a few days, I stripped the forms, and this went well. The outside boards came off without any problems, and the inside ones as well. I thought the curb looked great. I kept it covered with plastic to cure for a while longer. I'll be installing a pump in the shed beside the tank, so I roughed in a 1-inch water line that drops under the curb and over to the wall of the shed. More on that in part 3 of this series. All right, good. I rolled out some drain fabric and shoveled in a layer of crushed road base. Raked this flat and packed it down. Then I topped up the base surround with 3/8 pea gravel. It's a finer round rock that drains well and has no sharp edges that could puncture the tank. The pea gravel does not pack as well, so I added some sand to it, and that seemed to help. Now that the gravel was level and packed, we slid the tank into place. We used some 2x4s and a strap around the tank to help with this.
I got it. Ready? Yeah.
Stop. Let's see where we are. A little lift.
Yep. What?
All right. It was satisfying to finally get the tank into place. In the next episode, I'll cover all the plumbing to connect the tank to the downspouts. If you like what you see on our channel, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. And to be notified when that next video comes out, hit the bell button beside the subscribe link. Enjoy your day, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.